Let's start with just talking about some basic concepts that really show up in any kind of fertility process. And that is this concept of yin and yang. So yang being the forces, we say that the yang goes up to the heavens and the yin sinks down and manifests things on earth. So the yang force is this solar force. So we think about the yang as things that are active and expansive. The yang energy is hot. There's a lot of heat with yang energy. It's very bright. We think about the yang as being energy and movement. And in the body, the yang aspect of any kind of fertility process is the sperm. So that's going to be the yang energy. And the yin is the cooling energy. It's cold, it's watery, it's heavy. It gives things substance. And in the body, it relates to the egg. So here's the thing about the yin and the yang that we can learn from nature, that we can learn from looking at just our bodies and the way things are conceived. With the yang, we'll go back to the yang. Yang deals with thought, right? It moves quickly, and it can be anywhere, anytime. It's unlimited and it's unrestricted by time and space. So right now, as I'm sitting here in my house, in my mind, I can be laying on a beach in Belize, right? I've been watching a lot of Caribbean Life on HGTV. So frequently my mind just goes to laying on a beach in a hammock with the waves. And as I bring my mind to that space, that yang energy, I can almost see and feel myself there, because the mind doesn't have to do anything to get there, right? But the body is limited to time and space. It moves slower. The yin moves slower. So I can think I'm in Belize and be there in like 2 seconds. But if I want to actually get my body to Belize, I've got to book a flight, find a place to stay, get on the plane, pack my bags, get off the plane, unload my bags, go through a temperature check, right? So the yin moves more slowly and it's bound by time and space. The yin can only be in one place at one time. So even though my mind is in Belize, my body is right here in Brooklyn, New York, and no place else. And that's what we see in the fertility process, is that the yang, or the sperm, is ready. Any, sperm dysfunction aside, the sperm is ready to penetrate an egg anytime, anywhere. Doesn't matter if there's socks on the floor, doesn't matter. The sperm is ready to go, right? But the egg has one time and one place where it's ready to receive the sperm. Now, this blew my mind when I was trying to get pregnant, because I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so I was told, like, if you even kiss a boy or sit on a toilet, you could get pregnant, right? So when I was trying to get pregnant and I found out that my window for fertility was maybe 6 hours, or because I had compromised ovaries, I had like maybe a 1 to 2 hour window once a month. So I'm putting that out there to say that when we're thinking about balancing yin and yang, one of the most important things that we could do is to know our fertility cycles and to know the signs of when we are actually ovulating, not on some random calendar that someone said all women ovulate every 28 days. No, getting to know our own bodies and knowing when we are actually fertile is going to be the difference for some of us, just that shift alone, in terms of getting pregnant or not. Because the reality is, you can have sex all you want, but if it's at the wrong time, it ain't happening, because that is the power of the yin goddess ovaries. They determine the when and the where. Certainly Chinese medicine is really excellent for helping us to know when we're ovulating, using the symptoms that are associated with yin and yang, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So in an ideal world, yin and yang are balanced. They depend on one another. They can't exist without one another. They create one another. They transform into one another. Just like you can't have a coin with only one side, yin and yang are constantly in balance, constantly in flux. And that cycle of yin and yang in a balanced way we see throughout the progression of the year. So this yin and yang symbol is also a clock. So if we look at the cycle of the year, we have the yang time of the year, which is the summer solstice, the most yang, which is now, right? And if we think about what's going on in our lives, things are more young. People want to stay outside. They don't care about COVID as much because they're like, it's young. I need to be outside. I need to be extroverted. I need to be around people. Where's the party? That's the yang nature. And that yang is heightened right now as we come through the height of summer. And then we have the winter, which is the water element, which is the most yin time of year. And during the yin time of the year, for some of us, it's like, you can't pay me to leave my house. It's like, it's cold outside. It's dark outside. I just want to be by myself. So we have this fluctuations of yin and yang in the year. And of course, we have the equinoxes, which are balancing yin and yang, equal days, equal amounts of day and light. If we look at this clock during the month, we have the cycle of the moon, right? So the new moon, we just came through the new moon yesterday. It's kind of still in this newish phase right now. But the new moon is the dark moon. And then the full moon is going to be the most young time of the lunar cycle, which is going to be the full moon, where it's going to be bright and visible. And we see all these correspondences. Of course, with the new moon, it's dark and it's hidden. We can't see it. And then we get to the full moon and it's bright and revealed. So yin and yang balancing each other. And our bodies are no different. If we look at the daily cycle, right now we're at around noon, 1 o'clock. That's going to be the most yang time of the year, of the day. That's when our metabolism is going to be processing the most. And then versus midnight, when things slow down and we go inside. So we see these cycles over and over again. In the menstrual cycle, we can break the menstrual cycle into cycles of yin and yang. And so the yin side of this little symbol here is going to be the side of the cycle that's governed by estrogen. It's going to be when, first of all, it's when the menstrual blood flows. And it's when we start getting that sticky cervical fluid. Again, the yin is wet. It corresponds with things that are wet. And so during the yin phase of the cycle, we're growing the egg. Right? If the egg is growing, we're producing more estrogen. And then we get to ovulation, whether that's day 14 or day 6, whatever it is, getting to know your body. Then you come into the luteal phase, which is governed by progesterone. And that's why those of you who are trying to conceive and taking your temperature, they always say you look for the temperature spike in your basal body temperature. Why? Because that's the yang, and the yang is hot, right? So things start heating up after you ovulate. So we have this cycle of yin and yang in the body, and it all comes down to balancing water and fire. So those are the two elements that we're going to talk about the most today. Yes, all of the elements can be part of the fertility process, but fire and water are going to be the two that we talk about today. And so let's look at fire and water. In Western medicine, balancing fire and water, we're looking at the HPG or the HPA axis. So this connection between the pituitary, the hypothalamus, and either the gonads or the adrenals. Interestingly enough, the gonads and adrenals are both related to the water element in Chinese medicine. So we're looking at how our bodies in Western medicine are disrupted in our hormonal dance. Like, how are the hormones all balancing each other out? So I'll give an example from my own diagnosis, which was the premature ovarian insufficiency, where you have FSH, which is the yang hormone, and estrogen, which is the yin. And what you have in when you have a high FSH is that in the perfect world, the FSH says to the ovaries, hey, it's time to make some estrogen. But what happens with premature ovarian insufficiency is that the FSH says, hey, ovaries, make some estrogen. And the ovaries are like, what? I can't hear you. And so then what happens when someone can't hear you or stops listening or isn't listening is that you start yelling louder. So the FSH is like, well, the ovaries can't hear me. Let me produce a little bit more. And they start giving more communication. So the FSH starts going up. And then the ovaries are like, stop yelling at me. I don't want to do it at all. So the FSH goes up, the estrogen goes down, and now you have this fire and water that are in balance because of essentially a communication problem. And so when we're talking about balancing water and fire on a soul level, we're talking about how do we balance those pieces within ourselves. So one of the first ways that we do that is to just listen to your body. Listen to your body. What is your body telling you? Is your body telling you that there's too much heat, too much yang, too much activity, or is your body telling you that there's not enough heat? This listen to your body piece is really huge, because when I was going through my fertility process, I was working with the acupuncture, I was working with the herbs, and I got to this point where I realized that I had ovulated. And I had all of the signs of ovulation. And this is when the reproductive endocrinologist was like, it's done for you. It's a wrap. You need to find a donor egg. And I was like, no, I think I ovulate. I'm pretty sure I ovulated. And they were like, nope, it's impossible. Your FSH is at like 100,000. It really was. It was like through the roof. I had been in menopause for maybe 3 years at that point when I had started trying to conceive. So, but I had felt the changes in my shifts in my body. And so when they brought me onto the table to do the sonogram, they were like, oh, you actually did ovulate. And I'm like, yeah, dumbass, I know. We have to learn how to trust our bodies and to listen to our bodies, because our bodies have a wisdom that might defy science. And I want to encourage you to think of whatever blood work you have, whatever diagnostic test you have, as a snapshot of what your body is doing at a particular time. But because our bodies are energy, they can change. And so taking another snapshot at another day might give you a different result. So trust your body, listen to your body. Some of the things that you can look for as you're thinking about yin and yang, again, it's a balancing act. So some symptoms of too much yin might be weight gain. Why? Because yin is about substance and giving things texture, weight. So weight gain in the form of like extra fat or substance, abdominal weight, all of those things it's yin, it's sticky, it's heavy, it's symptoms of yin. Cysts like PCOS, there's a yin something going on. Having a lot of mucus or phlegm, feeling tired or fatigued or wanting to sleep a lot. These are signs that the yin is a whole lot of yin going on. And that could be because you have too much yin, or because you don't have enough yang, because remember, they're two sides of the same coin. Yin symptoms will also give rise to weepiness and fear. So feeling that hyper emotional, you think about like the stereotypical, though not quite the accurate reality, when they talk about pregnant women who are like crying all the time because of all the estrogen, right? It's a yin kind of way of being. And then the yang symptoms might be things like anxiety, or feeling hyperactive, or feeling irritable or agitated. So things are revved up. Things are a little yanged up. There's like a little bit too much going on. So that heat gives us the heat flashes or the night sweats. So again, this is a very simple expose on yin and yang. Fertility work with Chinese medicine is very, very nuanced, because some of us have both of these going on at the same time. A little bit of yin, a lot of yang, and so that balancing act is what comes into play. But this idea of listening to our bodies first and foremost is really key. The question is, what about really intense periods of heavy cramps and heavy flow? We have the intense periods and the cramps. That's going to be something that's a little bit more yang, but it's going to relate to stagnation. So stagnation can come from, it's basically, I think of stagnation as being like a blockage in the river. So when you have a blockage in the river, you're going to have too much water on one side, which is going to be yin, and not enough on the other side, which is going to be yang. So it's really a combination, that those heavy cramps and heavy flow and things, kind of like, they call it like a flooding period. It's like the dam broke and everything, like, so that's again, a more nuanced combination of yin and yang. So we're talking about fire and water, right? So water, the energetic of water is it brings things down and in, right? So that water, that yin, that archetypal yin brings our energy down and in. It calms us down. It calms the nervous system. It's our ability to feel that kind of serenity and peace that allows us to like sit still, be still, maybe meditate if we have that in our practice. So the water energy brings things down and in and serene. And then the fire energy is like this explosion, this like energy that radiates from our heart, that expands outward. And so just take a moment now to just settle in, no matter what you were doing before this call or what you might have to do after this call. Take a moment to take a breath and see which of these dynamics feels more like what you're experiencing in your body right now. Are you feeling things kind of settle and calm? Or are you feeling things that feel kind of excitable and moving up and outward? Or is it maybe a combination of the two? So just take a moment now to tune in and see what you find. So if you're a person that's feeling a little down or fatigued or tired, then you're going to think about yang activities to liven things up. You might want to do some more aerobic stuff, or you might want to eat spicier foods or lighter foods. Yeah, and then if there's something that feels like anxiety, like those fireworks, like things are going really fast, then you want to think about practices that can bring you into the yin. So you want to think about more things like yoga or deep breathing and being still. So that's just, basic ways that you can kind of balance yin and yang within yourself, just from paying attention to what's going on there and asking yourself with curiosity and compassion, what does my body need right now? What do I need to feel good in my body right now? So I will also say about the journey to fertility that it is a wild ride. There's highs, there's lows, there's ups, there's downs, there's some orgasmic fun, and then there's some deep wailing and despair. So all of those things are part of that ride, part of that dance through fire and water. So let's look at, I think I have up next, some flower essences to help us think about balancing yin and yang. Fire and water. So the first two essences that I want to talk about are Vessel and Goddess. These are flower essences along with Queendom, which isn't pictured here, that have to do with balancing fire and water. So the elementals are all specific to a particular element. The Sacred Feminine collection are not related to a specific element, but more related to these fluctuations between fire and water when we kind of have both things going on at the same time and on a soul level, right? So that's kind of using our bodies as a metaphor for what we might be feeling or emoting. So the first essence is Vessel. So I should say about these two essences that they were created with my friend Helen, who was a fertility specialist and also an acupuncturist. We sat down and we got together and we're like, well, what are the things that show up when the women in our practice are trying to get pregnant? And so these three essences came out of that exploration. So Vessel is a flower essence that is about restoring the connection between the heart and the womb. Or we could say that HPA, HPG axis. So when we're thinking about Vessel, we're thinking about something that happened that dysregulated the nervous system. Something that happened that the womb is holding that it needs to process and clear. And all of the things that disconnect our heart from our creative power. So we're looking at some of the indications for Vessel. It would be physical or sexual assault. So Vessel might be a place to start if you know that you have that in your history and you're wanting to clear out some things, whether you're trying to get pregnant or not, or whether you're trying to create something or not, if you know that there's some history or assault to your physical body, Vessel is one of the flower essence formulas that has a lot of flower essences in it for trauma. Trauma can also be in the form of medical intervention. I've used this formula with some of the patients in my practice that are going through IVF cycles because they're, doing the different hormones through the different stages, because there is something in that process that can disrupt our nervous system, that can make us feel disconnected from our own body's cycles and rhythms. Certainly miscarriage or abortion or history of either of the two will have an effect on our womb space. If we feel that is part of what's going on, then Vessel is one of the essences we would turn to. And then the last piece that I have here is patriarchy. So patriarchy does a number on the womb. There's so many messages about what our bodies should do, can't do, won't do, ought to do. And the womb is like, give me some space and let me just be my fabulous self that I am. And so Vessel helps us to kind of navigate through all of that stuff that we get from being in male-dominated, male hierarchy society that in general disintegrates the power of the feminine, the sacred feminine. So looking at two of the essences that are in this blend, one is hibiscus. And hibiscus is a beautiful flower of fire and water. You can see it has these bright, beautiful flowers which relate to the fire element. Any kind of flower that has this kind of bright, vibrant color is going to have like a fiery aspect to it. But then it has these big, juicy leaves and these big, juicy, watery petals, and it's a flower that soaks up a lot of water. So it's this balance of fire and water. And what this flower essence does is that it supports us in harmonizing the heart and the sacral chakras and allowing the fiery forces of the heart to penetrate into the watery forces of the womb. There are some places in the literature where they talk about hibiscus as being a flower essence that is supportive for vaginal dryness, just FYI. And hibiscus is very much a flower that will bring our consciousness or our awareness into our ability to connect through love. So where are the places that we feel disconnected from our heart or our womb? Hibiscus will help us to address that or to explore that. Another really beautiful flower in the Vessel formula is dogwood. Dogwood is the magnolia tree, and it's about restoring grace to the body. So there's parts of ourselves that harden and tighten in response to trauma. That's like the fight or flight response, things tense up. And sometimes our bodies hold and lock that trauma, and it becomes a certain kind of like stiffness or rigidity, either psychically or physically. And so dogwood helps us to bring awareness to those areas that are holding and tense and bring some softness and some grace to them, some consciousness through all of the limbs of our body. So it's really interesting. We often talk about dogwood being for someone who's kind of clumsy and like bumping into things, because the consciousness is not flowing all the way through the aspects of their full aspects of their body. The next flower essence formula that we'll talk about is goddess. And goddess is about the fertility to create new life and legacy in all of its forms. So it's goddess is tapping into, we could think about the Empress card in the tarot. It's this idea of experiencing ourselves as these creative, divine beings that leave something behind. And so that could be children, if we are in a creative space with our art or our writing, how we leave an impact in the world. So the first flower essence that we'll talk about is one called Lady Slipper, a little juicy thing there. And Lady Slipper connects our crown chakra to our root and sacral chakras. So it's if you look at the indications, it's one of those ones when I first found it or started learning about it, I was like, how are those two things related? So it would talk about for people who are confused about their career path and for people who have low libido. And you're like, what? But that's the connection. The connection is this kind of life force to generate And Lady Slipper really helps to connect us to our sense of authority, our own ability to create and to say, okay, this is me channeling the unlimited potential through my body and into the world. So whether that's my career path or the child that's been like floating around me for X amount of years that hasn't come into my womb space yet, Lady Slipper helps us to call that down and tune into our authority around doing that. And this flower essence is in the Goddess blend, but it's also in the Abundance blend, because again, it's same, right? Our ability to pull something out of the ethers and birth it through our bodies is a form of living in abundance. And then the next one is pomegranate. So if you ever look at the inside of a pomegranate fruit, it looks like some ovaries, little eggs in it. And so it has a correspondence to what pomegranate is used for is what we call ambivalence in the fertility process. So some of us, when we're going to create, there's a part of ourselves that is not quite ready or not quite sure. And oftentimes what I see with women that I'm working with on their fertility, they're not comfortable claiming that part. They don't want to say that they're not sure because they don't want that not sureness to affect their pregnancy or their fertility. They don't want to feel bad about it. But it's sitting there, this part of themselves that's like, I don't know. And so what pomegranate helps to do is to bring that ambivalence to the forefront so that you can really work with it. So it could be the person who's like, I want to start a YouTube channel and I have all these great ideas, but I'm not so sure I want to be seen. I'm not so sure I want to be a celebrity, right? So there's an ambivalence. I want it, but part of me doesn't, or part of me is afraid and needs a little bit more care. It could be, and I see this a lot because there's so much messaging around how quote unquote painful childbirth is, right? If you watch TV, it's like, it's always these women going through these like crazy, like, and they're yelling at their husbands and they're throwing things at the doctor. And so some of us have internalized that in our body and we're afraid. I've seen this with women with delayed labor. There's kind of this ambivalence around like going through this transformational process. So whatever the ambivalence is, pomegranate helps it to come to the surface so that you can work with it and really see yourself through a more clear light. And so now let's look at the fire element. So the fire element, the aspect of the fire element that we're going to be thinking about and looking at is this aspect of ourselves that is connected to the divine. So I love this quote from this poem, Desiderata. It may look familiar to some of you who are in some of my other classes. You're a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. And so this idea of feeling like we're in alignment with our life is an aspect of fertility that can be challenging because we have our timeline of when we want things to happen, and then we have the divine timing of things. And an example that I use for this is my nephew, who was born at 24 weeks, right? So he was born in February 11th. He was born at 24 weeks. He was less than a pound, and he was in the NICU for about 4 or 5 months before he was able to come home. And the narrative that they would talk about is that he was born early. And my perspective is like, no, he came when he was supposed to come. You guys got pregnant late because my brother was in the military and he wasn't there to get pregnant, but he was coming when he was supposed to come. So this idea that the universe has its own timing for us and that we can feel connected to that is the flower essence that I think of is Wholehearted. So Wholehearted is going to connect us to that fiery aspect of our being that, like Vessel, it's for those periods of feeling shock or trauma, but Wholehearted is about feeling reconnected to our sense of rightness in the world. Like, this thing happened, it was sad or it's frustrating, but I'm not going to spiral out of my path. Like, I can come back to a sense of wholeness. This formula helps us when we're feeling that, like, either devastation or anxiety, or when we feel like we're ready to give up. I know I definitely felt that way after I had my miscarriage. After trying for almost 2 years to get pregnant and then having a miscarriage, it was like I was done. I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I can't take it. And so some of the flower essences that are in Wholehearted help me to re-engage with my body in a different way. Wholehearted is also a formula that I'm using a lot now for folks who are feeling particularly stressed or overwhelmed or triggered by what's happening politically in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, also in terms of COVID. So it's any situation that brings us off of our sense of belonging in this world at this time, and allowing our lives to unfold and feel some kind of soothing in how things are unfolding for us. And so the flower essence that is the key mama flower essence in the heart space for the Wholehearted formula is Star of Bethlehem. Star of Bethlehem, as we talked about Vessel earlier, it's in there. It's also in a blend called Oasis, and it's a flower that helps us to soothe the heart. I call it the flower that helps to welcome the spirit back into the body. It's like everybody calm down flower essence. It's, if those of you who are familiar with Rescue Remedy or the 5 flower formula from the Bach line, Star of Bethlehem is one of the key flower essences in that blend to calm the heart and to calm the soul and the spirit. So Wholehearted is one of the essences that is really powerful in that process where you just feel a sense of being outside of yourself. It doesn't have to be some major traumatic thing, though it can be, but just that sense of discouragement or disconnection, or whenever we start to have these questions like, why am I doing this? Why do I care? It's too hard. I don't want to do it anymore. Star of Bethlehem and Wholehearted helps us to kind of stay and re-engage in our life, to be connected to our life. So now let's talk a little bit about some flower essences for the water element. Again, the water element is that sinking down and in to ourselves. And the aspect of the water element that I want to talk about is about roots and lineage, because we are connected in a stream of time through our ancestors, through our mothers. And I've seen in many cases in working with fertility that sometimes the challenge to fertility is there could be something in the line of mothers that needs to be addressed, healed, explored, loved, compassionate, kindness sent to. And I love the Native American, proverb we're saying that when we heal ourselves, we're healing 7 generations forward and 7 generations behind us. And so sometimes the fertility process is sent to us to help us to explore and heal some of those wounds that are waiting to be healed. So the flower essence for the water element with fertility, of course, there's others that I think are really helpful in the process, but for today, I want to talk about legacy. Legacy, we have here this picture of the Sankofa bird from the West African tradition, this bird that flies forward while looking behind it at the same time. And so with legacy, we're looking at our ancestral and cultural heritage as a deeper understanding of ourselves, opening our receptivity to guidance of elders and ancestors, and as I mentioned, exploring and healing wounds in our family of origin. It's also useful for either side of the coin, either someone who needs to kind of return to their lineage. I had one patient that was trying to get pregnant. It was a long journey, and then finally when she went home, it actually happened that she got pregnant when she was on her ancestral land. But it's also for someone who is maybe carving a different path from their family of origin. Maybe they're doing something a little bit differently than everyone else in their family line. So to have the courage to stand behind that is part of what this flower essence blend helps us to do. And the two flower essences that I want to highlight are Angelica. I love this flower so much. It's in every single one of the water elementals essences. So Legacy, Sacred Source, and Oasis. And then it's also in Present Presence, which is the flower essence I use for anxiety. But this flower helps us to be receptive to our ancestral and spiritual guides. So we all come from different spiritual traditions. Some of us believe in ancestors and communicate with our ancestors. Some of us feel this just divine presence. Some of us call it God or Jesus. Some of us call it the universe. So whatever we call it, it's our connection to it and our feeling of protection, and that we're not alone on this planet as human beings, but that we're surrounded by light beings that are there to assist us. And what Angelica helps us to do is to be receptive to that kind of subtle communication, whether it's in the form of a sign that shows up for you, or synchronicity and coincidence, or a message that comes to you, or a friend that calls you. However those guides speak to you, when we're working with Angelica, we can tune in. And that often supports us in really getting clear on what is needed for our process. I know there was one moment where I was taking a bath and I just got this message of like, get some roses, and I put some roses in the bath, and I just had this mind image of these women dressed in white just pouring sacred water all over me. And so that Angelica tunes us into that kind of level of healing and experience. And then we have Joshua Tree, which is this beautiful moon blooming flower. And this is the flower that we're looking at for exploring generational wounds or karma. So really digging up and excavating, in some cases, stuff that's lurking in the shadows on the spiritual level. And remember, the babies and ideas that we're bringing in are coming from the world of spirit. So they're sitting right next to whatever's there. And so sometimes we need a little bit of help healing those generations forward and generations back, and looking at some of the trauma or wounds that haven't been addressed, so that they can be cleared and a path can be cleared for the generations coming forward. So as we get ready to wind down, I'll stop recording in a bit and take and speak to anyone's questions about what we shared. But my special gift to you for joining me today and listening as we kind of navigated these waters and this fire is that you can order any of the elementals essences for 20% off and free shipping with the code Fertile Ground. So it is a code that can be used for one essence. We do recommend working with one essence at a time. So we ask that you use this discount code only one time for only one essence. And you can use it for any of the essences that we talked about today, or on my website, oceansandrivers.com, you can go to the page that says Find Your Essence or Online Assessment. And it's an interactive series of assessment questions about your stress level and about your goals that will help you narrow down to 2 essences that might be most relevant for you. And you can just choose one of those essences, and again, use the coupon code Fertile Ground, and we'll ship it out to you. And if you would like to stay connected, there's lots of ways to do that. I offer private sessions, which I call an integration of Eastern medicine, Western psychology, and ancestral magic. So a bit of what we did here today, but on a more personal level, more prescriptive. So we'll go through your health history and look at your goals and figure out what of these different traditions is going to most support you. So those private sessions are available. The Soul Medicine Clinic is also open. I'm coming together with 4 really great practitioners who went through my certification program, and we are offering sessions Monday through Friday. They do have to be booked in advance, but it is a reduced cost session that includes a flower essence, so you can certainly sign up for that on my website. And then every Friday at noon via Zoom, I do something which is called the Soul Medicine Circle, which is looking at what's going on in the world and some practices from soul medicine to support us through those times. if you feel called or in a position to support this work, we do have a Patreon page. So if you go to Patreon, look up Oceans and Rivers, it'll show you different ways that you can donate to support ongoing free webinars and the Soul Medicine Clinic. So your love, gratitude, and financial support are all equally appreciated.